following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
One of the cornerstones since the founding of ABNY of the things that we focused on was fiscal responsibility, as the city was heading towards bankruptcy, but also more importantly, infrastructure investment. And so we, along with the Center for Urban Future, released a report yesterday, Tom, that I'm sure you'll be looking at, and we'll maybe ask you a few questions afterwards about infrastructure investments and the nearly $50 billion that we need to ensure that our city remains competitive. So we're honored that we were a part of that report. It is now my pleasure to welcome back again Comptroller DiNapoli, who has been an incredible public servant for our state. And we have, I think, navigated the last few years of a very complex and dynamic budget with the great help and great guidance of our speaker. Tom is our 54th controller and is known for integrity, independence, and steadfast leadership. Since taking office in 2007, he has aggressively fought misuse of public resources, strengthened one of our nation's top public pension funds, and consistently spoke out against fiscal gimmicks, imprudent actions, and government inefficiency. Last year, as part of the Comptroller's mandate to examine state, city, and local finances, he launched a fiscal monitoring system to rate communities on their fiscal conditions, sending an early warning for those communities in trouble. He also shed light on the issues that cause communities to face fiscal stress in today's tough economy. Prior to being controller, Tom was represented the 16th Assembly District in the Northwest Nassau County for 2 decades. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Comptroller Tom DiNapoli.
Good morning, everyone. It is great to be back once again at ABNY. I appreciate this wonderful turnout. I know you're all busy individuals, and I very much welcome the opportunity to give you an update on so many of the issues that we work on in the Comptroller's office. I thank Bill Rudin for the generous introduction, much appreciated, and for inviting me to be back to speak with you once again. I certainly want to salute Bill and the staff and the team at ABNY and all of you who support the efforts of ABNY for everything that this organization stands for. Through bad times of the past and the good times, the better times that we seem to be going through now, ABNY is such an important voice in terms of bringing together all the important stakeholders in our city and keeping an agenda that's focused on moving New York City forward. So how about a round of applause for ABNY for the great work that you do each and every day. Bill mentioned that I've had the privilege to speak to you in the past, and you may recall the last time I was here, I spent the bulk of the presentation on the issue of retirement security, and specifically about the growing numbers of Americans who, because of the decline of defined benefit pension plans and other changes in our, particularly on the private sector side, are facing the golden years without an adequate level of savings for their retirement. My pitch at the beginning, it's not what I'm going to talk about today, is that still is an important issue and one that I think we all need to continue to focus on. I was very heartened that our visitor yesterday in the city, President Obama, as part of his State of the Union address, did talk about the retirement savings gap, has a proposal for a government-supported investment option for those who are not covered by traditional pensions to allow for as little as $5 in a payroll period to be put aside for savings down the road. This continues to be a very pressing national challenge, one that we all need to be more engaged in, and I'm going to keep reiterating that as we all move forward. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today, but I did want to put in a plug that we all need to stay focused on that as a very, very important issue. What I am going to talk about is more broadly what's happening with our city and state economy, and certainly our finances, both at the city and state level. We certainly can all agree that this great city and our great state have been through an economic grinder over the past few years, one of the most difficult economic periods in our history. The Wall Street earthquake of '08 and '09 and the resulting rolling tsunami of job losses across the nation and here in New York was a profound economic event, one that cost our state billions in lost revenue and hundreds of thousands of jobs that were lost. But as we stand in March of 2014, we do have better news. The latest economic indicators show clear signs of recovery for the state and for the city. So what I'm going to do this morning is provide an overview of the city and state budgets, give a little more definition to that picture of recovery that we see from the state controller's vantage point, and also share with you a first look at our findings as we do every year about this time of year on our Wall Street bonus estimate. We're releasing that today. We look at that carefully because what's happening on Wall Street has a very important impact on revenues for the city and for the state. There are, of course, so many indicators that we look at in the Comptroller's office with regards to trying to chart where our economy is at. And certainly in virtually all of the indicators that we look at, we can say that the state economy, looking broadly, and even on a regional basis for most regions of the state, we're certainly in a condition of improvement. The unemployment rate, which is obviously a very common indicator, continues to inch down. We'd like it to drop more rapidly, but it is going in the downward direction. 6.8% in January, the lowest that it's been at over the past 5 years. Private sector jobs have rebounded significantly since the recession. You may recall when the recession first hit, private sector jobs tanked at the front end. Public sector jobs stayed relatively stable because of the impact of the federal stimulus money and just because change sometimes takes a little longer on the public side. Now, private sector jobs significantly rebounding, continued contraction for many of our governments, local, state, and federal in terms of workforce, but the net effect certainly is that we are creating more jobs in our state and certainly in our city as well. According to the latest data from our State Department of Labor, New York State has added back all the jobs that were lost during the Great Recession of '08 and '09, and actually have added jobs. If you look at it at a percentage basis, we're at about 145%. So not only gained back all the jobs, significant job addition. It's about 480,000 jobs statewide. We're certainly ahead of the nation, and that's good news in terms of job regrowth. And it's still a challenge, though, because we need to do more. Until we have opportunities for everyone that would like to have a job, we can't say we're out of the tough time. The other challenge from a state perspective is that the level of job recreation and economic recovery varies depending on where you live in New York State. It's a very different picture downstate than it is for many of our upstate regions, and that certainly is continued cause for concern. You go to the metropolitan statistical areas north of the downstate suburbs, and while one or two of them are back to the pre-recession levels in terms of where their jobs picture is at, many of them are not back to where they were in '08 and '09. And that's certainly why, from a state perspective, there's a renewed emphasis on regional economic development initiatives. The governor has the regional economic development councils that are focused on that. Another indicator that I think shows positive signs, sales tax collection. Sales tax, an important revenue source for local governments, for state government as well. They increased by $789 million in 2013 over 2012, a 5.2% increase. Statewide home sales, what's happening with our real estate market, another important indicator. Statewide home sales were up in 2013 by over 12.6% over 2012. So all good signs. Are there challenges out there? Absolutely. One of the challenges specifically related to the housing issue is the question of the affordability of housing costs in New York State. We just put out a report this week, as many of you may have followed, on housing affordability in our state. And what we found is probably no surprise, and that is that we have millions of New Yorkers and New York households, upstate and downstate, this is not a region-specific issue, that are paying 30, 40, in some instances 50% of their household income on housing costs. The federal definition of what the threshold of affordability is is 30% of your household income going to housing costs. So we have some 3 million households across our state that are above that 30% threshold. So that trend has troubling implications, certainly for those that are struggling to be able to pay the rent or pay the mortgage. But what it also means is that we have so many New York households where an increasing percentage of their disposable income is being spent on the essentials of housing costs. It means they have less money available to spend on other essentials that would be an important part of keeping the recovery going. So I recommend you take a look at that report. It's online, as all our reports are, and I think it suggests an issue that we all need to consider and look at a little more carefully. More specific to New York City, certainly we see very clear signs of significant economic improvement and recovery. The city's employment growth has been very, very strong. Since 2009, New York City has added 275,000 jobs, 2.5 times as many jobs as were lost during the Great Recession. Employment has reached a new record of 4 million. Now, this is certainly very, very positive news. But again, there's always another side, right? Most of the recent job growth has been concentrated in lower paying industries and jobs. So many of the higher paying jobs that were lost during the recession, while they've been replaced in terms of a pure headcount analysis, many of the new jobs are at a lower end of the wage scale. Half of the jobs created in the city since the recession have been in industries such as home health care, restaurant, hospitality, retail trade as well. That being said, the citywide unemployment rate has fallen over the past few years from the recessionary peak of 10.1% to 7.8% in January of this year. It's the lowest level in 5 years. So again, certainly more positive news than negative. We do have to recognize, though, that even though the unemployment rate is going down in the city, that rate is still higher than it was before the recession and is still higher, certainly, than the national rate as well. The other factor that I think we have to consider is that the unemployment rate is distributed in different ways as you travel across the boroughs of New York City. It's higher in some boroughs rather than others, in some neighborhoods rather than others, and certainly some demographic segments of the population, you certainly show variety and difference. So just one area of example, 19% of the working age population in New York City lacks a high school diploma. The unemployment rate for those that lack a high school diploma in New York City is 17.2%. So certainly when we keep in mind all the discussions that are going on about education, I think those kind of numbers validate the point that the access to a job, whatever the job may be, is still very much tied to your level of educational attainment. Long-term unemployment is also a problem here in the city. About half of the unemployed people in the 5 boroughs of New York have been without a job for more than 6 months. And that share has barely budged over the past 3 years. The percentage or the share of residents in the city without a job for at least 2 years has also sharply risen over the past couple of years. So again, positive news overall, but among some, you have persistent unemployment, and that is an area of concern. Certainly, though, with the overall positive economic regrowth in the city, that has helped from a revenue and a tax collection perspective for the city. While not all of the economic indicators have returned to pre-recession levels, certainly the broadest measure of what's happening in New York City with regard to the economy, the gross city product, the good news is it is nearly back to the pre-recession level. So again, the repair and the recovery certainly continues to move in the right direction, and that's very, very good news. Wall Street is one of the key economic indicators and engines for our city and our state. And we certainly know that the impact of the Great Recession was felt profoundly in the securities industry here in the city. As you know, we put out an annual report on the securities industry in New York City. We do that in the fall of every year. Our most recent report in the fall of 2013 documented a very impressive comeback on Wall Street since the bankruptcy in Lehman Brothers and everything that followed. It doesn't mean that there aren't still challenges ahead. Let me remind you of some of our findings from a couple of months ago. Following 2 years of record losses in 2007, 2008, the industry has been profitable for 5 consecutive years, including having the 3 best years on record, 3 out of the last 5 years. The risk of another financial crisis has been reduced given the regulatory changes, although when you consider the firms that were thought to be too big to fail during the crisis, they're larger today than they were before, so certainly risks continue to be out there. You continue to see the fallout from those difficult years. The securities industry has paid a number of very significant legal settlements relating to activities during that time. And that litigation and those legal settlements will no doubt continue for at least the short term. That will continue to be a drag on industry profits. The Federal Reserve's low interest rate policies obviously have contributed greatly to the securities industry's return to profitability. It remains to be seen how the industry will perform as the Fed begins to raise rates and as you see continued implementation of the regulatory changes. I think it's fair to say from my point of view that Wall Street has successfully adapted to the regulatory changes that have been implemented thus far, but keep in mind only about half of the regulatory rules that are required by Dodd-Frank have actually been completed. So it still remains to be seen what the full impact will be. When you look at issues like the Volcker rule, limits on proprietary trading, the final version that was unveiled was more restrictive than many on the street had thought it would be. So again, we remain very careful in looking at what the long-term impact will be. Job growth also has been an area of weakness when you talk about Wall Street. Certainly the industry has had strong job growth after the low point of 08 and 09, but in 2011 we saw a trend of downsizing to be resumed. When you look at the two previous recessionary times, the Wall Street and regrowth in the securities industry is really what led us out of a tough economic time. That has not been the case with our current recovery. In fact, Wall Street has only accounted for about 1% of the jobs created here in the city's private sector during this recovery. When you look at the job regrowth after prior recessions, it was closer to 10%. So you're certainly seeing a changed employment picture when we talk about Wall Street. We estimate that as of December of 2013, the securities industry employed 165,200 workers in New York City. That's nearly 13% fewer than before the financial crisis. So whereas we see other industries rebounding in terms of job growth, combination, I think, of the regulatory changes and the impact that that's had, and frankly, impact of technology and increased productivity, we're not seeing the same kind of headcount on Wall Street that we have seen in the past. That being said, because we're all concerned, as we should be, that New York continues to be the global capital for finance, New York has more security industry jobs than any state in the nation, a full 2.5 times more than the second-ranked state, which is California. And though the securities industry is smaller, it is clearly still a major economic engine for our city and certainly for our state as well. So keep in mind this figure. While the securities industry accounts for only 5% of private sector jobs, only 5% looking at it from a headcount perspective in the city, it represents 22% of the city's private sector wages. So certainly an outsized contribution to the economy of the city from that sector. Recent data suggests that employment in the industry may be stabilizing, and perhaps the downsizing that we saw just a couple of years ago is leveling off. But again, the challenges are there to maintain profitability, and certainly to the extent that compensation is a big part of your costs, probably no surprise that one way that the industry is keeping the profits up is reducing headcount, and that, again, has implications long term. We're not projecting, although we're seeing stabilizing in the workforce from a headcount perspective, we're not projecting any significant growth in the industry in the near term. Again, why do we look so carefully at what's happening on the street? It is a very significant contributor to our economy, and we should never understate that. And we also project that in the good times, when Wall Street is adding jobs, for every job added on the street, 2 other jobs are created in other parts of our economy in New York City, 1 other job created outside of New York City. And again, consider, some of the numbers. The average salary in the securities industry for 2012, the year that we have the latest, most accurate data, was $360,700. So again, to put it in context, that's more than 5 times higher than the average salary in the rest of the city's private sector. It's an average. Doesn't mean everybody is making that kind of money in the sector, but still it shows the outsized impact on our economy of these jobs and why it is very important that Wall Street be healthy and profitable for all of us. We learned that the broker-dealer operations, the New York Stock Exchange member firms, which is the traditional measure of the industry's profitability, reported earnings of $16.7 billion for the year of 2013. $16.7 billion. Sounds like a pretty good number. It is lower than the year before, when profits were closer to $24 billion. But that being said, when you look at historic numbers, it still is certainly a very, very good year. And again, keep in mind the impact of those litigation and legal settlement costs and the impact of the higher interest rates. So again, a lot of factors impact on where we're at with Wall Street. We are releasing today, and announcing it to you, our annual estimate of Wall Street bonuses. We do our fall report on the health of the industry broadly. This time of year, we do our report on Wall Street bonuses. We've done this for many years because traditionally, these have been cash bonuses that have had a big impact as far as tax collections, and of course, this being for the state, the last quarter of our fiscal year, in some prior years often resulted in a windfall that frankly, was very helpful to legislators this time of year when budget decisions were being made. It's a little different right now. First of all, we release our estimate later than we've done in the past because there are many changes and more moving parts when you look at the question of compensation with regard to the securities industry and certainly specifically to how bonuses are managed. So things have changed, certainly as one of the fallouts of the 2008 financial crisis. Firms, as you know, now pay a smaller share of bonuses in the current year, and a larger amount is deferred to future years. And bonuses are not evenly distributed across the workforce. You need to keep that in mind. It's obviously concentrated among the higher salaried employees. When we release our estimate, we're often asked, can we break down the data in terms of job title and salary? We don't have access to that information, so we have more of an aggregate number as far as our bonus estimate. But with that qualification, our estimate is that the average bonus paid to security industry employees in the city grew by 15%, now at an average of $164,500 during this year's bonus season. This is the largest average bonus since the 08-09 financial crisis. Now, the bonus estimate, again, it's different than going back 5 or 6 years ago and longer. It includes cash bonuses for the current year, but it is supplemented by compensation deferred from prior years. The total bonus pool for the securities industry employees who work in New York City, this is specific to the industry employees who are based here in the city, totaled $26.7 billion in 2013. What that means is that over the past 2 years, the bonus pool has grown by more than 40% as employees have cashed out deferred compensation, such as restricted stock units. Again, when you hear some of those numbers, for many, you're going to say, wow, that's an awful lot of money. And it is. But again, keep in mind the overall contribution of this sector of our economy and of these higher earning individuals to the strength of the city's finances and the state's finances as well. We can't minimize that. Last year, the securities industry accounted for 16% of the state's tax revenue. A very, very significant contributor to the overall tax strength and revenue strength of New York State. 8.5% of the city's tax revenue as well. In fact, the percentages had been going lower, and now they're starting to go up again. So with all the other concerns that we have for paying for important services in our state that we all want and that our citizens deserve, keep in mind that Wall Street contributes significantly to our ability to pay for those services. Now, another interesting side note to this point is that New York City had assumed in its budget that, in fact, bonuses would decline this year. So with the numbers that we're projecting, I'm estimating that the city could realize an additional $100 million in tax revenue in the current fiscal year that had not been anticipated. So hopefully that's some good news for the city as the city and the new administration grapples with its budget concerns and budget challenges. So it's very, very clear. New York City has experienced solid economic growth in recent years. As you know, a month ago, the city revised its 4-year financial plan to update its revenue and expenditure forecasts, and certainly to begin to reflect the new priorities of the new administration. Over the past 7 months, the city has raised its tax revenue forecast by more than $5 billion through the 2018 fiscal year, again, because the economy in the city has been outperforming prior expectations. More than half of the additional tax revenue comes from the real property tax, reflecting a growth in property values across the board, certainly commercial as well as residential. The remainder comes from higher personal income tax collections from strong job growth and capital gains on stock transactions. A sharp increase in real estate transactions that also generates revenue, especially for commercial properties, and sales tax collections that benefit from New York City continuing to be an incredible tourist destination, not only for Americans but for tourists from across the globe. These resources contributed to a projected surplus of $1.8 billion in the current fiscal year, which the city will use to balance the 2015 budget, and also permitted the city to greatly reduce the out-year budget gaps that had initially been projected, and to do something else which I think is important, to start to replenish the reserve funds for the city, and to pull back on some of what had been projected to be budget cuts, and to deal with some of the unexpected expenses of this weather season of a very tough winter and all that we've had to deal with to keep the roads clear. The city's four-year financial plan includes a number of new initiatives that the mayor has proposed, including one that you may have heard about, to provide quality full-day pre-kindergarten services to all eligible children by January 2016, and to expand after-school programs as well. To fund these initiatives, Mayor de Blasio is asking the state, again, as you probably have heard, to raise personal income tax rate on the city's highest earners to raise about $500 million annually. The governor has proposed an alternative strategy to fund universal pre-K and the after-school programs. I think the good news, I'm often asked, and one of the advantages of being a controller is that I don't have to make the decision. That's for others to make the decision. I think the good news, though, that we need to keep in mind is that both the mayor and the governor are committed to expanding the pre-K options, and I think most would agree that that's a very positive step educationally. And as we head towards the conclusion of the state budget negotiations, and that will be done certainly by April 1st, might even be done a few days before, I'm confident that there will be a resolution on this issue, and those are the discussions and deliberations that are going on right now to figure out how to reconcile the different approaches. Certainly from the perspective of the impact on the city's financial plan and the city budget, we're going to know the answer to that question in just a couple of weeks, and in terms of what the source of funding will be, and that will certainly then have an impact for the executive budget proposal that Mayor de Blasio will unveil in May. There is uncertainty in terms of the city's budget, risks, if you will, that we've identified. A big one that we've identified over a period of years is the cost of collective bargaining. As we all know, the labor agreements among the city's unions have expired, some as long ago as 2008. The administration has indicated a priority to reach agreement with some 150 bargaining units, that's a priority. And part of that negotiation is to look for cost savings opportunities from the unions as part of that negotiation. That being said, the net cost of the outcome of those contract negotiations could certainly be substantial in terms of having an impact on the city's budget for the future. Again, until we know what the final structure of those labor agreements will be and what the costs will be, we don't know the answer to the impact. Big unknown question. Will there be retroactive wage increases, and what will be the cost impact? That's certainly, if you just look at cost of living over the years where there hasn't been a wage increase, you're talking in the billions of dollars. So a lot of unanswered questions in terms of what will be the long-term impact of collective bargaining on the city's financial and budget future. Although revenue collections could be higher than forecast by the city, other budget risks besides collective bargaining includes the issue of the taxi medallions. Still have to get some approval on that, an anticipated receipt of $1.2 billion during fiscal years 2015 through 2017. Again, will all of that proceed as projected or not? That's a risk that we identified. The financial health of the Health and Hospitals Corporation is another area of concern. Will HHC require more financial assistance from the city? That's not currently contemplated. And the continued concern about the rebuilding after Superstorm Sandy. Will the federal aid, as projected, in fact come through on the schedule as projected, or will it fall short of expectations, and what will be the impact of that? Certainly looking forward, areas of rising costs are debt service and health insurance costs for municipal employees. Together, these two costs are projected to grow by $4.6 billion, or by 47% between fiscal years 2013 and 2018, going to consume 24% of the city's fund revenue by 2018. So certainly those are areas that I think need to have appropriate focus. We have left for you on your chairs, we don't want you to leave without something, our report on the city's financial plan. Feel free to take it for your reference. It provides much more detail than the summaries that I just went through. With regard to the state budget, Governor Cuomo and the legislature deserve credit for putting us on a better fiscal path. We've been in a stronger financial position at the state level than we've been in for many, many years. And the governor's executive proposal for 2014-15 that's being debated right now certainly holds the promise that we can achieve ongoing balance after many years of having structural budget gaps. That being said, when we put out our analysis of the executive proposal, I did express concern that one of the assumptions with the out years, putting aside the current year budget that will be adopted and acted on, when you project on the out years and that long-term balance that the governor's proposal suggests, it's predicated on limiting state spending to 2% in the coming years. The challenge is there's no definition to how that's going to be done. So you've got a figure in there that says we're going to hold spending to this level without the detail of explaining how that's going to be generated, either by cuts or what the additional revenue may be. So that's a concern, and we've identified that in the past as part of the changes we'd like to see as part of the state budget process. When you have out-year gaps, not only identify the gap, but start to identify how you're going to close that gap. So that if, as an example, if part of how you're going to close it is cutting back on aid to localities, you need to signal that early so contingency plans can be made. If you're going to downsize certain agencies or certain state programs, let people know what that is so we could figure out how to implement it. So that is a concern, because you don't have the definition of how you're going to make that percentage. And again, because our recovery is certainly positive, but it is somewhat uneven at this point, I think so much of that really depends on the pace of economic recovery, and that is always difficult to project. As you know, one of the big questions that's being debated right now is the issue of taxes. Governor's had a number of proposals in terms of tax relief. Perhaps the one that's getting the most attention is property tax. That's a big issue in many parts of the state, as you know, and adds significantly to the overall tax burden in New York. You know, the challenge whenever you're looking at tax relief, whether it's property taxes or corporate or business taxes, the estate tax, another issue that's on the table, how is it all going to add up? And that's what we do in the Comptroller's Office. When we analyze these proposals, respect the role of the governor and the legislature to make the policy choices as to what tax policy should be, but it all has to add up at a time where obviously many New Yorkers are coming to Albany this time of year. Some of you have been there to advocate for more spending, whether it's on health care, transportation, education, or our other needs. So as the state process closes out over the next couple of weeks, we will analyze the final budget that's adopted, and our focus will be on, is the budget balanced? And I'm confident for the coming year that's going to be easily achieved. But what we're really going to look at are those out years, and will we know a little more about how that 2% holding on state spending, will we know more about what's specifically proposed there and how realistic will it be? So stay tuned. So our city and state economies are getting stronger, and the budgets reflect this stronger economic environment. I'll just mention briefly that our common retirement fund that I'm the trustee for has also rebounded strongly from the recession. One of the reasons why Moody's gave New York State a more positive outlook was an improving economy, an improved budget picture, and relatively well-funded public pension plans. So we don't have the issues that Illinois and Jersey, some other states have in that regard. We ended our last fiscal year with a positive return of 10.4%. Our audited number for our fund is valued at $160.7 billion, an all-time high. So we're past our prior high point that we had before the markets tanked and we had that significant loss in 08 and 09. Part of why our fund is strong is because we've stepped up the investments that we make right here in New York State. We do that through our in-state private equity program, where we look for opportunities to invest your pension fund dollars in companies that are starting up in New York, based in New York and expanding or relocating here. Just in this program alone, and there are other programs that we now have $684 million in 256 New York-based companies. And the money we put in has leveraged an additional $6.7 billion in additional capital, helped to create or retain thousands of jobs. And it's not just about the advantage of saying we're doing more for New York companies. Our fiduciary responsibility is to make money for the fund. With the companies we've exited from with this particular program over the past 5 years, we've had a 20% rate of return. So it's good for the pension fund, and it has the other benefit of helping to grow businesses in New York. I would point out to this audience that the majority of the companies that we've invested in through this program in recent years are in technology firms, and most of those firms are located right here in the boroughs of New York City. The tech sector is an important source of high-paying jobs today and for the future of our city. It's a growing sector, and it's certainly supported by New York City's world-class academic institutions who are partnering to create new science, engineering, and technology programs and campuses, including CUNY, right, Jay Hershenson? We got to put in a CUNY pitch before I'm done. Tech companies are attracted to the quality and the skills of the city's workforce and the synergies possible with New York City's content-driven creative industries, advertising, fashion, media, and publishing. Because we've had so much recent activity, and I think it's an untold part of the tech story, how the pension fund is part of this story, we're going to be releasing a report in the next month or two that's going to spotlight the tech sector in New York City, including the number of jobs and economic impact of the sector, and certainly showing what our significant investments have been in this sector through our in-state program. We value the fund March 31st of every year. So I need you all to go to church, synagogue, mosque, wherever you go over the next 2 weeks. We need the markets to stay strong, because that doesn't matter any other day. March 31st is the day. But I'm confident we're going to have another good year, barring geopolitical things that have been going on lately that have made the markets a little jittery. And we hope to have another year of good news, where something else that we did last year that we hadn't done in a number of years, we cut the contribution rate that's charged to our government employers. That's good news for taxpayers and for municipal budgets across our state, and certainly continuing to have a secure defined benefit pension plan for our public workers who are working now, or our retirees and those who hope to be retirees. It's why 80% of our retirees continue to reside in New York State, meaning that the 80% of the $9 billion we paid out in benefits last year stays in New York. And I would suggest to you respectfully that 80% of that $9 billion, that's part of the economic engine that's helping many of our local economies stay stable. When you have people who can stay in the state, pay their taxes, spend money, support the local businesses, and it's why I'm a strong proponent of the system that we have. So, in summary, the state and the city are moving in the right direction. Our economy is recovering. We certainly still have work to do to turn this recovery into sustained economic growth. Better budgeting at the city and state level is part of that. More targeted regional investments, including what we can do with our pension fund, is part of that. Certainly, from my perspective, government, business, not-for-profit sector, we all have to be smarter and more efficient. We need to communicate and collaborate more often. I have no doubt that if we in government keep those lines of communication open with all stakeholders, if we listen to your experience and suggestions and build on what works, our economy can build on this momentum and emerge stronger than ever before. Certainly, we will do everything we can with the appropriate role for the Comptroller's Office to shine the light on economic trends and on budget challenges, and try to have a more informed and thoughtful debate on what kind of policies we need to adopt at the city and state level to help businesses and communities succeed. Certainly, ABNY is an important part of that conversation as well. So, as I wrap up, I'm going to ask Bill to come forward, because I'm going to make a presentation to Bill. The fun part of my job, there are many fun parts. The most fun part is unclaimed funds, when we returned lost money to people. Well, it's not in his name personally, so don't know. He's getting too excited here. But we have $12 billion worth of unclaimed fund accounts. Go to our website when you can't sleep 2 in the morning, put your name in.
Does that say 12 billion?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't even say 1 billion. But it's not only individuals, it's organizations as well. So it turns out that ABNY had some unclaimed funds coming to them. So Association for a Better New York, this check is for $3,814.32. I think we just paid for breakfast. There you are. So my only suggestion is, given some of the uncertainties out there, Bill, cash that as soon as you can.
Tom, thank you. And I think ABNY's budget is now balanced. So, but seriously, it's really fantastic to start the day off with great news. So we thank you for the $100 million tax benefits for the city, and I'm sure there'll be, Mark will make sure they put to good use. But it's, I think things that you mentioned here are many issues that we've been focusing on, and you talk about the challenges for the financial service industry and its importance to the city, and I think that's definitely one of the big takeaways, and obviously technology and its growth in the city and its importance in our continued diversification that's been going on, that we've been talking about for a long, long time, particularly in Lower Manhattan, but now really throughout the whole city. But it does make the point, your report, that how important the financial service industry is to it's our main business, and we should be doing everything we possibly can to enhance and grow that industry along with other industries, and obviously quality of life and all the things that have been going on for so many years. Crime are an important key, but we have a major threat with particularly New Jersey. Their tax incentives for companies to move there is off the charts in comparison to what we have the ability to do. So I just want to ask you a question. How do we make sure we continue to keep those jobs, whether it's the high end, the medium end, the low end, all the spectrums? How do we make sure that the financial service industry, in light of the regulatory environment, which you just said only half of it's been implemented, and just talking to some of our tenants, the concerns they have, what do we do going forward to make sure that we continue this positive growth?
I don't think there's any one single answer to that I would offer. I think the first thing we need to do is to have a greater appreciation for the impact, as you echoed, of this industry that benefits all of us. We all have our own opinions about what happened in the financial crisis, who's to blame, and all that. But if that results in an overall climate that's reflected broadly in a host of policies, not specific to the industry, but that makes the industry feel not at home here, that's going to be a real problem. I think the reality is all of the strengths of New York City, of which there are many, and we're all familiar with, that's going to be a great counterbalance to no matter what other states do. But as the industry continues to respond and readjust to the changing climate, perhaps, and it's not an analysis we've done at this point, but your question suggests that maybe we should, and Ken Blywis is here from our New York City office, and we could take a look at it. Are there other kinds of incentives that we could perhaps suggest, maybe starting by looking at Jersey and what other states are offering, to see whether or not that makes sense here for us from a New York State policy perspective. So that's an issue I think we'll take a look at, but I think the first thing is to have there be a more broad understanding of the strength of this industry is very important to all of us.
Okay, thank you. Just as a note, you're doing a tech report. ABNY, we're doing a tech report too, so okay, hopefully we'll be saying the same thing. Questions from the audience? Dawn?
And the tech jobs moving forward as well?
Well, I'm not an expert on the city's pension fund. I can tell you what we've been doing has been making capital available. Very often, the issue is having capital to get a business going. Now, there are different ways to do that, and certainly pension fund is not an economic development fund, and I want to be clear that we do not view what we do as economic development, but it is a way for us to make money. And I think one of the things that we've had to do differently in terms of our programs in this regard is to have confidence that we can have some capital invested in smaller tranches in earlier stage. I think one of the issues that I've heard as I've traveled to the state, I would say not unique to the tech sector, I've heard this in terms of some other sectors, and certainly regionally heard it a lot upstate, is that very often the capital that's available is in larger sums and for later stage. And it's been a little bit of a challenge for us to get to the point where we have a comfort level, because it's riskier, right? If you're investing earlier, even if it's a smaller amount, it's still a greater risk. And certainly with our capital, we tend to be risk averse. That being said, given what interest rates are, you have to take some risk, otherwise you're not going to make your assumed rate of return. So I would suggest for the city, from certainly the capital that's in the pension funds, take a look at some of our successes where doing more on the venture and early stage side and smaller amounts has I think been a smart strategy. And with the broader agenda of economic development programs, which are for the state level separate from our office, and certainly the city has their own programs, again, look for opportunities where you could make financing available, whether it's loans or investment capital, of smaller amounts, earlier stage. That, I think, would be what would be most helpful. And of course, encourage what I think is already happening anyway, but maybe do more to encourage the communication, the collaboration with the higher education institutions in the city. Because that's really, right, Jay? That's really where it's happening. And that's where the talent pool and the intelligence and all the bright young people that get educated here, we want to keep them here. Let's have more of an articulation between the tech center and the higher education field. I think that would help as well. Anything the city and the state could do in that regard would be positive.
Great answer.
Hi. In the effort to reduce the tax burden, one of the strategies that's been floated is a consolidation or a rationalization of municipal governments and their services. Just want to get your view on that strategy.
It's a very common question and concern. I live in Nassau County, so and I live in an area where I'm a resident of a village and a town and a county and a sewer district and a library district and a water and fire district and, did I say park district? I'm always voting for commissioners and trustees, many levels of government. And when you talk about outright consolidation of government, which is one part of the discussion, everybody likes the idea until you tell them, oh, I didn't mention school district, especially school district. When you say, well, we're going to merge your school district with 3 other districts around, then suddenly everybody goes, wait a minute, that's not what I bargained for. So my overall perspective is where the numbers make sense and you have a local interest in fact, merging jurisdictions, you shouldn't be afraid to look at it. And you shouldn't be afraid to have that discussion with the public. Most often what happens, because in a democracy we require votes for that to happen, 9 times out of 10 those votes go down. So a lot of effort is spent over years and nothing comes of it. What I think that there should be a greater priority on is looking at consolidating the services without necessarily eliminating the governments, because I just think you get into so much local politics that sidetracks the discussion. We've put out reports and analysis that shows, for instance, with back office operations, IT services, you could save, you could say, I think our report had like $160 million statewide, if I'm remembering the number correct, but a significant number, if you would have counties and towns sharing the school districts and municipalities. The state has some programs to incentivize looking at opportunities for shared services. I think we should do more to incentivize those kinds of programs. Some localities are doing it on their own because the numbers make sense. I think some need a little more of an incentive. I also think we need to get to a point, especially with school districts, because that's the big expense, right? For people outside of the city, our property tax is the big issue. Generally speaking, 60% of property tax bills go to schools. I think beyond services, like IT functions and joint purchases and joint bidding, you should also look at, depending on the size of the district, sharing administrative personnel. I don't know that we need the same overhead in every district that we have, and when you look at the great variety in the size of school districts, there's no rationality to it. And I think if we did more, and there was actually a school district, 2 school districts out on Long Island in Suffolk County that recently, and I heralded it. I said, it's about time somebody thought of this. They had a vacancy in the superintendency, and instead of having another superintendent search, they, in fact, are sharing a superintendent with the district next door. I mean, that's a small step, but I think doing more to encourage those kinds of shared services across the municipal jurisdiction lines is a way to save money, avoid some of the pitfalls that you get into when you talk about outright mergers. But look, we have our fiscal stress monitoring system. Bill mentioned that. You look at all the pressures on local government where, the revenue hit has been significant at the local level for, all the reasons, and local governments don't have the same variety of revenue sources that we have at the state level, so they're struggling. And they've been getting less in terms of federal and state aid over the years. And so, their tax base has gone down because of the tough economic time. It's just starting to recover. They're not getting as much federal and state aid. They have costs rising. The local governments, from my point of view, are really the front line of fiscal stress in our state. And the state's in better shape, but our localities are not. And we do not want to see, it's why we have our fiscal stress monitoring system and why I encourage the kind of initiatives you raised in your question. We do not want to see a Stockton, California, a Detroit, Michigan happen in New York State. The governor and the legislature set up a local government restructuring board. That is another way that we in New York are trying to be ahead of the curve and ensure that no locality falls into full financial crisis. But doing more with shared services is part of the answer.
Thank you. It's 9:30, so I know everybody's got to head back to work. So Tom, thank you very, very much, and we look forward to working with you. We'll see you all on Friday with the governor. Thank you.